NORAD.
Your questions, Commissioner Ben-Veniste.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Following up on this shoot-down authority, General Arnold, from what source did you receive the shoot-down authority?
I did not receive a shoot-down authority.
You say it was received subsequent to the crash of 93?
Oh, yes, that's correct.
From what source was that
It was
received?
passed down to us from the NORAD, from Cheyenne Mountain, that they had received shoot-down authority. And then, the time frame escapes me at the moment, but, for example, over the Washington, D.C. area, it was declared a no-fly zone. And just by the fact that any aircraft was present, if we could not determine that that aircraft was friendly, then we were cleared to shoot that aircraft down.
When was the declaration of no-fly zone authorized?
I don't know. It was shortly during that time frame.
Here's a major problem, is because the order for a shoot down is disputed. Now, the initial order for a shoot down came from Vice President Cheney, and it is not known exactly what time, but between the hours between 10:12 a.m. and 10:18 a.m. According to Navy Commander Anthony Barnes, he asked Vice President Cheney, because after the first plane had hit the World Trade Center, when Flight 11 crashed in North Tower, the Vice President was ushered into the PEOC, which is the Presidential Executive Presidential Emergency Operations Center, which is located underneath the Pentagon. I'm sorry, in the White House. Now, when that happened, they were still unsure whether this was a terrorist attack or not. But after Flight 175 crashed in South Tower, everybody knew this was a coordinated attack. When the plane was coming to the Pentagon, FAA notified NORAD that they needed intercept jets at this point. And they did so with 175, but it was much too late. Plane had already crashed. And they got there within, I think, a 5 to 10 minute frame. Intercept jets arrived in Manhattan from Otis, I believe, Otis Air Force Base. So Andrews is right near the Pentagon. So they authorized, which you're going to hear in the testimony here, they authorized airplanes to go up. Now, it's not automatic, because they have to get authorization from NORAD, which is in Cheyenne Mountain Operations Center. They have to get authorization to put hot guns on there, right? Because these planes, they're not used to having a shoot down authority. It's never happened before. Okay, they're not trained in this area. So this is, truthers seem to think that we could just put weapons on these planes and just shoot down planes. It doesn't work like that. You have to get authorization to put weapons on the plane. Then they have to get authorization from the executive branch, specifically the president, not the vice president, the president, because the vice president is not part of the chain of command, military chain of command. It's president, defense secretary. Now, remember when the plane hit the Pentagon, Rumsfeld is out of the Pentagon, so they can't get in touch with him. Bush is already in the air, and they couldn't get a consistent phone connection with him and the vice president. So who runs the country? Cheney. He's the only one in the White House in the presidential executive command bunker, okay? Rumsfeld is outside the Pentagon. Bush is in the air in Air Force One. He can't land anywhere. So between the time of 10:12 a.m. and 10:18 a.m., according to the testimony of Navy Commander Anthony Barnes, he asks Vice President Cheney about authorization for a shoot down, and Cheney confirmed in the affirmative. Now, the vice president isn't actually part of the chain of command, okay? In theory, he doesn't have the authority to order fighters into battle. That's up to the president and the Secretary of Defense, Donald Rumsfeld, let alone take the unprecedented step of shooting down a commercial airliner filled with civilians. Okay, it's now it's not clear, and this is coming from years of extensive investigation, which has never been definitively determined. Okay, whether Cheney had actually spoken to Bush to get such an authority. Now, both men have hinted that they've spoken prior to Cheney's order, but coming from, the testimony of people like Andrew Card, National Security Advisor, who's on Air Force One, as well as other people who testified that Bush couldn't get a consistent, a strong connection to the vice president, because they're in the air and they're going through multiple waves of airspace. Now, both men have hinted that they've spoken prior to Cheney's order, but there was little evidence that they actually did before the shoot down authority. What is clear is that Bush concurred with the order when he spoke with Cheney aboard Air Force One, and that's coming from contemporaneous notes from the plane by the press secretary, Ari Fleischer, when he took notes at 10:20 a.m. That finally, at 10:20 a.m., President Bush told his aides that he had authorized hijacked planes to be shut down. But of course, by then it's too late. So, but the thing is that here we have the chain of command from NORAD basically saying that they got authorization for a shoot down before 93 crashed into the field in Shanksville. Before. But the authorization for the shoot down didn't come from Bush until 10:20. Now, if that's the case, who gave NORAD the authorization to shoot down these planes? That came from Cheney. And just like I said, there's no evidence that Cheney got the authorization from Bush before 10:20 a.m. So that means the vice president, outside his chain of command, was ordering a shoot down. Stunning. That's a stunning admission.
So are you saying that that declaration gave you shoot down authority?
No.
Irrespective.
It gave us, that particular declaration that I am referring to as a Class Bravo airspace within the Washington, D.C. area was shut down to aviation, except for military or for law enforcement emergency response aircraft at that particular time.
To help me understand, does it mean once that condition exists, that unless you were able to determine that this was a friendly aircraft, which under the circumstances, I suppose, means under the control of the terrorists at that time, making it unfriendly aircraft, that you had authority by
true.
Whatever means to bring that down?
Yes.
At what time during this process was that order issued, and who issued it?
I do not know who issued it. It's my understanding it was issued by the president or the vice president in his stead, that order was issued. And it was issued around the time that we decided to put all the aircraft on the ground, as Mr. Mineta, Secretary Mineta had referred to at that particular time. So
we would ask you to supplement your testimony today with specific information about that. At what point was, to the best of your knowledge, any order received from either the President or the Vice President of the United States with respect to action to be taken by the military in connection with the ongoing situation?
it was my understanding that that occurred, the direct communication to me. I can't answer if it was done at a higher level at some point in time around 5 minutes after the United 93 had crashed into Pennsylvania.
And
which allegedly has crashed at 10:06. So that means that when Barnes spoke to the vice president, that fits the same time, right? 10:12 to 10:16 or something like that is when he got the authorization from Vice President Cheney. But there's no evidence to suggest that Cheney got it from Bush, because Bush is the only one who can authorize the shoot down of civilian airliners, and after him, it's the Secretary of Defense Donald Rumsfeld, and then it's up to the Joint Chiefs, NORAD.
and
So I don't know.
so you would be able to check the records of,
Because Cheney is overstepping his bounds as vice president. He's not in the chain of command for the military. He can't make these decisions.
NORAD generally, or the DOD generally, to find out when a presidential directive was issued?
I'm sure General McKinley will do that for me.
Thank you. And if I understand the context of what you've said about closing the perimeter around Washington, the president's directive or the vice president's directive would have been moot because of the prior order, which would have enabled you to shoot down an unfriendly plane in that sector.
Well, you know, we develop a certain, I guess the short answer again is correct, but it's very specifically in the Washington, D.C. area by presence. That aircraft was hostile unless we could determine that it was friendly.
Let me go to the issue again to revisit Flight 77, because as we understand it, tragically, it appears that that was the only plane which reached its intended target, which might have been interdicted that day if everything.
What he's speaking about is that that's the plane that could have been interjected by defense jets, right? Because they had the time, because FAA warned about non-communications with Flight 77. I think that came around 9. When did they lose contact with them? 9:18, 9:20, I think. Don't quote me on that. I don't know the exact time. But they then contacted NORAD regarding trying to intercept this jet that's not communicating back with air traffic control at Ronald Reagan Airport, or at Indianapolis Airport too. Now, at the same time, while this was happening, they knew that these planes were crashing, the planes had crashed into the World Trade Center, 2 of them already, right? So you have one airline, United Airlines, one American. And this one was an American Airlines flight. And basically, the Ben Sliney, the FAA, it was his first day on the job, by the way, which is September 11th, ordered the flights to be, all flights in the air landed, right? So national shutdowns, never happened before. And he ordered a shutdown. So at this time, as long as, it's recorded, that at least they knew that Flight 77 was in the air for 25 to 30 minutes. That they could have intercepted it.
Had gone right.
Now remember, also too, Flight 77, when it crashed in the Pentagon, was an act of war. It wasn't an act of war when the planes hit the World Trade Center, but it was an act of war when the plane hit the Pentagon. That's why this plane is so intrinsically important, because we went to war with who? Afghanistan and Iraq, okay? So, these people who promote no planes and no hijackers don't realize the magnitude of their error here, is that without a plane and without hijackers, you don't have a crime happening at the Pentagon. And if you want to say, a missile at the Pentagon, you're going to tell me that people at the Pentagon can't discern a plane, a Boeing airliner from a freaking missile? I mean, it's just childish. And not only that, you absolve the CIA and the Saudis and the Israeli apparatus from foreknowledge, not even complicity, just foreknowledge of the event, because they're the ones who were following who? The hijackers inside the United States and in Germany. and Spain. So this is why it's so important, because you have these planes that were hijacked and they crash into these targets, and they don't realize the magnitude of what they say and what they disallow and who they absolve. So it's just the truth movement itself is basically destroyed because of these dumb fringe conspiracies that involve no planes and hijackers. Well, if you don't have no hijackers, you don't have intelligence apparatuses to blame. You don't have anyone to blame. Who are you blaming? Nobody? The missile, the space beam from Judy Wood? I mean, it's really childish. It's frustrating.
Are you in agreement with that?
I think, from a physics perspective, yes, that's correct.
Well, let's go beyond physics for a moment, and let me ask you about the planes which were scrambled from Andrews Air Force Base. No, from Andrews Air Force Base by the Secret Service of the United States. Who gave the order to scramble jets, F-16s also, I believe, out of Andrews?
My understanding that the FAA, that the Secret Service requested
I'm wrong.
that they launch anything they could to get them airborne.
Okay, I didn't know that. No, I'm wrong there. I actually thought it was coming from NORAD and Cheyenne Mountain. Actually came from Secret Service. Interesting. Oh, that's interesting.
Of whom did they make that request?
I'm not sure if it's General Worley, Dave Worley himself. General Worley's a wing commander, General Dave Worley, and I think they actually talked to him. And I did not know this at the time, of course, but just they called him up and said, what do you have that you can get airborne? He had some airplanes returning from the range on training mission.
What would be the flight time from Andrews Air Force Base of two F-16s to the Pentagon?
From the time they were notified?
Yes.
Probably 15 to 20 minutes, because it takes about 10 minutes to get airborne, and they're not set up on alert or scrambled. In fact, it could have taken, didn't have any airplanes immediately ready to go, it could have taken them 20, 30 minutes.
Yeah, and look, this is important too, right? So they have to get 10 to 20 minutes to take off, right? Because there's no intercept jets. In the air, the exercises that were happening on the day itself, Malcolm, Virgo 1, 2, and Vigilant Guardian, whatever, they were in the air, and those planes didn't come back until after their exercises were done. This is even when the planes were hijacked and crashing into the World Trade Center Pentagon. So now they have to get these other intercept jets that don't have authorization yet. They have to get authorization from NORAD, their generals like Craig McKinley and Ralph Eberhard or Larry Arnold. And what they have to do is they also have to get additional authorization to put weapons on these planes. And then they have to get authorization from the executive branch, basically the president or the defense secretary, about shoot down authorization. And if that chain of command is broken, there's no continuity of government. It's up to the military to authorize the shoot down authority. So, but interestingly enough, I didn't know the Secret Service had authorized or called NORAD about getting defense jets. So that means that the FAA basically somehow got in contact with somebody from the Secret Service, or did that chain of command? I'll have to look that up.
And under the
We
circumstances,
already had airplanes airborne. By the time those airplanes were airborne, we had airplanes over Washington, D.C.
right. Now, if the order had been given to Andrews even simultaneously with the order that you gave to scramble your planes, is it not fair to say that those planes would have reached the Pentagon sooner?
They might have, but they would have been unarmed.
Right, because exactly right. Why? Because it's 9:36 when the plane hits the Pentagon. There's no shoot down authority, and there's no evidence to suggest that Cheney got shoot down authority before 10:20 a.m. That's recorded. That's Andrew Card. Ari Fleischer basically recorded it. So, even if they got planes to the Pentagon, what were they going to do? Crash into it? Well, according to the Air National Guard, right? So the Air National Guard's pilots, such as Lieutenant General Mark Sasseville and Heather Penny, they were actually going to crash into Flight 93 in Shanksville. They were going to ram their plane because they didn't have shoot down authority even then. And they said that they didn't have weapons on these planes, and it would have taken too long to put weapons on the planes and then wait for orders for a shoot down authority. Remember that plane crashes at what, 10:03, I think, 10:03. So Penny and Sasseville, they said that neither of them have any second thoughts about flying their planes into Flight 93, in which they would probably eject themselves out of the plane. So that in its own right is interesting, because that suggests to me that at that point, even still, they didn't have shoot down authority, or it wasn't relayed to them either. But they're the Air National Guard.
Sir, yes,
Right.
that would
They're not authorized to shoot.
be my comment, sir, is those aircraft are not prepped or built up for that mission.
And in fact, we have received reports that are almost incredible in terms of the bravery of the two pilots who went up that day in unarmed aircraft with the mission, I presume authorized somewhere in the executive, to use their airplanes to bring down Flight 77 or 93 if they.
It was Sasseville and Penny, and that's the Air National Guard that he's talking about. And it's Flight 93. And they didn't get authorization. They were just going to do it anyway, crash into Flight 93.
Could interdict them. That means to clip their wings, crash into them, perhaps the pilots at the risk of their own lives. Is that correct?
Sir, as I evacuated the Pentagon that morning, as I came out the river entrance and looked up, virtually simultaneously, those F-16s coming back from the range had been airborne, had dropped their weapons, were returning low on fuel, were visible to 10 to 15,000 people, and it was a very heartening sight to see United States Air Force fighters overhead the Pentagon. And it is my understanding from the review of the records that that was their guidance.
And who provided that guidance to them? Was that a decision made internally by Secret Service, or did Secret Service require a higher executive order in order to launch those planes on that mission?
I do not know that.
I'm unaware of the answer to that, sir.
Chairman, thank you.
Okay, here's another problem that faces authorizations or shoot down orders, is that at no point in any of these planes, either 11, 175, 77, 93, would they have been able to be shot down at the time. Now, Cheney went overstepping his bounds outside of his chain of command. He basically was running the country because Bush is in Air Force One, flying over multiple states. Donald Rumsfeld, the Secretary of Defense, is outside the Pentagon. He's not at the chain of command, and he would have the authorization for shoot down authority. Well, basically, he's outside helping people, and you have to wonder why he did that. You know, there's also excuses saying, "Oh, that's just the person he is." Yeah, sure. You have to wonder whether this was, Cheney calling the shots. He was really the president for a couple of hours there until Bush got back. I think it was when he landed and made his first press briefing. I forgot what state that was. Well, anyway, when he made his first press briefing, he was refueling Air Force One and basically was in touch with Cheney at the time. But before that, Cheney was running the country, and he was actually the real president of the United States, making decisions on behalf. Now, NORAD, this is no excuse for NORAD. NORAD gave a faulty timeline. And even though the FAA basically was inept about handling multiple hijackings, which never happened before, basically they are prepped about hijacking airliners. And they basically, had these novices at the controls of the chain of command, basically in a very unorthodox position of handling multiple hijackings, which were, where the planes were used as weapons, which never happened before. It was really just a unique experience, which caught a lot of people off guard. But it is stated that NORAD basically knew about an earlier time frame when these planes were hijacked, and they gave a wrong timeline. Now, 9/11 Commission basically said that I don't know why NORAD gave us this timeline. You saw another individual on that table. His name is Rick Scott, Lieutenant Rick Scott. Now, he's the one who gave the timeline. The timeline was wrong. It was different than the FAA timeline, which was handed to the 9/11 Commission. 9/11 Commission basically said, and this is coming from Tim Romer, co-chair Thomas Kane, but they basically said they demanded NORAD to give us a revised timeline because the timeline that they gave was completely off. For us, the general public, 2 minutes is nothing. But for NORAD, it's almost like an hour, okay? Intercept jets can fly at high rates of speed and can meet these jets. And, they just missed 175 by a mere couple of minutes. That's not the case with 77. That's why Richard Ben-Veniste brought that up about, the one plane that could have been intercepted was Flight 77, because they knew that that plane was in the air, not communicating with air traffic control. And the FAA basically warned, now it seems the Secret Service, and the Secret Service basically called NORAD, said, we need this plane to be intercepted. And basically, you heard some of the testimony of Craig McKinley and Larry Arnold, where they basically said, we never got we never got the intercept jets in time. Now, somebody's off here, and I'm willing to say it was NORAD. So, see you in the next video.